How's it going, everybody? So, in this video, I decided we would be discussing why science is so important. And obviously, this is going to be in regards to health, nutrition, and even exercise programming and exercise science. So, why science is important? Okay, so first of all, we have two different extremes, okay, and this is very important to understand before we can even begin the discussion, because, okay, so on one side of things, you have an extreme of people who think science is just completely flawed and, like, there's no use in using science and it's way better just to use anecdotes, and they're like, well, if it works for me, then I don't care what science says, or else they'll be like, science is like the Illuminati and, like, it's pharmaceutical funded and it's corrupt, and therefore we should just disregard it altogether, or else you'll have other people that believe if it's natural, then it's good. They're like, well, our ancestors did it, therefore, like, it's good for us and we should be doing it too. We naturally evolved from apes, therefore we should eat like a gorilla. Case closed. Or whatever, if you're like a carnivore person, you're like, yeah, well, our ancestors were apex predators, therefore we should exercise like an apex predator, we should eat raw meat like an apex predator, and it's like just a complete extreme. Like, no matter, or else you'll have people, who are just like, well, if it works for a large majority of human beings, if you have thousands of humans that all do the same thing and get the same results, then that's all that matters, and therefore we'll just do that because it works, okay? Like the Okinawan people, they have great health and longevity, and therefore all humans should eat like the Okinawans because they're a community of people who are eating a certain way and living a certain way, and they're getting good results. Therefore, it applies to everybody. Okay, so that's one extreme, right? That's the, or like in exercise science, and in the exercise field, in the like, strength training or whatever, people will be like, well, all the champion powerlifters that I know about, they all trained exactly this way, and therefore, that's all that matters. I don't care what science says. Train just like Eddie Hall or whatever. Okay, so that's like the purely like anti-science people, okay, on one end. Then on the other extreme, you have people that are like, anecdotes don't matter at all, because, if it's, anecdotes are not data, blah, blah, blah. We need, we need peer-reviewed studies that control for all confounding variables, and that are verified by people that actually have PhD next to their name or whatever, and then it's got to be verified and repeatable over and over again, and we need studies in large groups of people as well as smaller intervention trials, and so they have a really, really high standard that has to be met before we can actually have practical, usable information that works in the real world. And so both of these are flawed, okay, as far as like being pure on one side or the other. And so this is kind of a concept I've been trying to talk about for a long time. I've been kind of working on this philosophy and piecing it together bit by bit, just because of everything I've seen in my own experience as an athlete myself, as a personal trainer for over 10 years now, and being in the health and nutrition community, where I actually reverse my own chronic health conditions, and I've witnessed thousands of reports of other people, and I've helped clients reverse their conditions as well, or even just general health improvement and well-being improvement. So, all right, so why is science important? Okay. So I have kind of made videos talking about why anecdotes are important. But like, so here's the thing. So first of all, you can have like large groups of people who are getting a certain result that and their methods may not be backed by science. A good example would be, and you know, backed by science means many different things. All that it means is it's not like aligned with the general consensus, is what I'm trying to say. Something like a carnivore diet, okay? A carnivore diet's a good example because there are literally thousands of people, and it seems like new people every single day making videos on YouTube, a lot of which actually have documented evidence of reversing their autoimmune conditions, chronic digestive illness, and obviously metabolic issues like type 2 diabetes and things like that, and obviously obesity and fat loss and blood pressure issues. Which also generally come along with weight loss as far as metabolic issues. Autoimmune illness and digestive illness are reversed pretty commonly using carnivore diets without weight loss, and oftentimes with weight gain in the form of lean muscle tissue, because generally these people weren't eating a lot of protein before. Now, here is the problem, though. So we have, on one hand, we have people who are using some what looks like some crazy, obscure diet paradigm to and they're getting great results with it. And the method flies in the face of what everyone else thinks is healthy. Right? Because mainstream nutrition thinks that polyphenols and fiber and all this stuff is vitally important. Not just for general health and things like, you know, your HDL and LDL cholesterol, if you think that that's important, and blood sugar regulation and things like that. And even people, you know, but for digestive health, they think they need to eat a bunch of fiber and vegetables, for example. But then you have these people with Crohn's disease, and for me, like irritable bowel syndrome, which I don't really identify with or think of as a disease, but more so just a syndrome, a complex of symptoms. But and they're removing all fiber from their diet completely, and solely eating red meat and animal products, which in the mainstream are oftentimes claimed to cause inflammation, which is a very nebulous term, or cause these digestive issues and things like that, or to contribute to these diseases and contribute to autoimmunity. But then these people remove all fiber and things. And the mainstream thinks that you're just going to be, you know, constipated and stuff, and then vegans will say it'll rot in your intestine because you're like constipated, which is stupid considering, you know, meat and animal products usually are mostly completely digested before they even hit the intestine, especially the colon. They hardly touch the colon, and this is probably actually why these people reverse. Or have such good success, you know, with resolving their symptoms, okay? Putting a disease in remission, you can make all sorts of arguments as to what that actually means, but we're just talking resolving symptoms, okay, is what I'm trying to talk about. And so, anyway, people with chronic constipation constantly, and including digestive pains and discomfort, which is a real diagnosis. People talk about having success with like removing all plant foods in that regard. Okay, so the point here though is that's anecdotally, like that seems to work for a lot of people. Now here's the problem with this is in the purely anecdotal world, okay, no matter what nutritional paradigm or exercise paradigm or health paradigm you're coming from, whether it's veganism or whatever, carnivore, keto. In the anecdotal realm, the problem is that people have these like oftentimes crazy assumptions about why their anecdotal methods are producing results, okay? And so in the anecdotal realm, the problem is seeing that something's working and seeing that the mainstream thinks that you're full of crap, and then thinking like that there's some kind of conspiracy, thinking that, like for example, carnivore people, they're like, freaking plant foods are poisonous, freaking garlic is a neurotoxin, some of them say. And you know, plants are like creating warfare on our intestine, and they're like, you know, they're so poisonous and they're killing us, and that's why autoimmunity and all these other problems seem to be triggered by plant foods. Okay, so that's the anecdotal realm, is like, you know, and then like I mentioned before in another video, raw vegans, they're like, you know, meat rots in the intestine, the body is alkaline, you know, and like the reason why the raw vegan diet causes reversal of diabetes and fat loss, and some people have actually shown documentation of putting certain forms of cancer into remission, as crazy as that sounds. And they're like, it's because the body is electrical. That's Dr. CB. The body is alkaline. The alkalinity, like the body's alkaline supposedly. And like meat acidifies the body and all this crazy stuff. Or it brings negative karma. And so the reason why you have diseases when you eat meat is because of the negative karma that's like punishing your body on a deep cellular level. You got to cleanse your cells of toxins, like, or you know, you gotta detox the acidity. And so what will happen in these groups of people is they'll reverse a disease or something initially. They'll have a bunch of fat loss, they'll reverse diabetes, whatever. And usually their triglycerides will go up, even though they're losing weight, which is crazy. At least that's what I've seen. But they'll reverse the disease initially, seemingly. Their symptoms will go away, but then they kind of like their body disintegrates, and you see their skin starts to get saggier and saggier. Their muscle tissue goes away, and they lose like an unhealthy amount of weight to the point where they look like they're not even eating after a certain point in time. And they develop all sorts of weird symptoms. And just to name a few, hair loss, they'll lose their periods, and a variety of others. And then they'll extrapolate that to again, reinforce their dogmatic anecdotal things, where they'll be like, I lost my period because periods are toxins. When a woman has a period, it's a sign that she's detoxing, you know, and the blood is actually toxic waste products being excreted from the body. Having periods are not natural. There goes, again, the appeal to naturalism, the natural kind of justification. And it's, you know, like a truly spiritually cleansed human will not produce period blood. And then there's a lot of males, you know, men in those communities who will be like, who stop ejaculating. And then they're like, yeah, semen is unclean, it's toxic, and if you ejaculate, then you are unclean. And so that's why raw veganism, you know, initially reverses symptoms, but then eventually you lose your period, you lose your semen, because those are unclean, and that's detoxing. And what you'll see in these communities is they'll have all these negative side effects, and they will be like, it's detox, it's detox. You're basically on the verge of death. You'll see these vlogs, these video logs of these people who are like literally dying. And they have a lot of symptoms of hormonal imbalances, malnourishment, and just obvious signs of vitamin and mineral deficiencies. And yet they can't snap out of it because they're so like convinced that their dogmatic anecdotal paradigm is 100% correct. And spiritual reasoning or just reasoning that it can easily be explained through science. But they back it up with irrational kind of reasoning because they don't have the scientific backing. They don't study the science because they think science is whatever. So anyway, a basic understanding of science of the science behind how a lot of these things work can help explain why some of these problems happen and why some of the successes happen. And if the science-based people, evidence-based people, who I would claim I am, if they would stop appealing to authority and just saying all of that crap, that all of the success that's happening with them is either placebo or it's because of their controlling calories. It's the weight loss or it's placebo. Your autoimmune illness goes away, it's placebo. Your chronic digestion goes away when you remove fiber, it's placebo. It's like, bro, like the fiber thing, we need to fucking address that elephant in the room. Okay? There's no way that the carnivore people reversing Crohn's and chronic constipation and all these things, and then of course debilitating depression and autoimmunity, all of that shit's placebo. Okay? And let me just say that the evidence pointing towards the power of a placebo, while placebo is very powerful, in regards to things like the magnitude of effect is not great enough to explain and justify just how many people are experiencing success in these carnivore communities on that. So there's that, okay? These science-based people, evidence-based people need to take off their blinders and start to fully examine, accept the fact that a lot of these people are having success with reversing diseases that the mainstream has no solution for, and be like, okay, there's something weird going on here with these carnivore people, and my understanding of science, of the science of nutrition, needs to be open so that I can further examine why are these people having the success that they're having, instead of just being like, oh, they're all bullshitters, they're carnivore zealots, blah, 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 okay? Because to me, because I've been there and done that, and I've moved past the carnivore dogma, and now I'm like, well, why are these people having success? And now I'm examining with science, and I could see I could kind of unravel it, right? And science doesn't prove facts, and this is another big problem with people who they're not actually scientists and don't have a actual education, is they think, well, science is a study of facts, and therefore, what science says is just reality. And they don't understand that science in regards to health and nutrition and exercise is extremely subjective, and it's not a gathering of facts about this works and it's concrete. It's actually a gathering of evidence using, studies and things that are extremely open-ended, nuanced, and always have confounding variables that are not controlled for. There's no perfect study design that controls for all confounding variables. And even worse is at the foundation of most studies. For example, exercise science, okay? They'll take a group of people they'll take a group of people and they will put them on an exercise routine, and they'll measure their effects before the study and after the study. And then they'll try to quantify the results of these people on that exercise routine. And they'll compare them to another exercise routine, a different exercise routine. And the big problem with this is that they assume one exercise routine is going to work indefinitely on all people. And the big problem is that exercise routine, its entire purpose is to adapt a human being to a new stimulus, and how well a human being adapts to that exercise routine is entirely dependent on the exercise and the stimulus that they've previously been adapted to. So, for example, if you are lifting weights using 5 sets of 5 for 6 months, at first you're going to suck at that, but then after 6 months of doing 5 sets of 5, you'll get really, really adapted and better at doing 5 sets of 5. Until eventually that 5 sets of 5 no longer produces an adaptation. And it doesn't matter how much more weight you add to that routine, the weight on the bar does not continue to drive that adaptation. In order to continue to improve, you have to change the routine entirely. You can't do 5 sets of 5 anymore. So now, those people who are already adapted to 5 sets of 5, in order to continue to change and adapt and improve, they need to start to do like 5 sets of 10 or or 5 sets of 3. Some other completely new stimulus has to come that they're not already adapted to. And the reason why is because adaptation to exercise is entirely dependent upon what these people are adapted to before. And their body's not going to adapt to a new exercise routine if the exercise routine is not new to them. And so what that means is, if you take a group of people who are not already trained or are not already adapted to an exercise routine, like they're like lazy people who don't exercise, and you put them on an exercise routine, literally unadapted people who are lazy, who are not exercising, sedentary people, they will get improvements with any single program. And so the first flaw with exercise science, and this is just an example of a big problem with science that regular people who don't study science, they have no clue about. They just assume science is like all this godsend and factual thing. But nutrition science has these flaws too. But the point is, most training studies on exercise science are done on unadapted people. And so, a lot of textbooks use these types of studies. The second problem with that is if you take people who are already trained, like you take athletes who are already trained and put them on an exercise routine, the thing is, yes, these people are athletes, they're athletic, and it's better than sedentary people. But the results that they get on a new exercise routine in the study are going to be entirely dependent on what exercise routine they're already adapted to previously. So what I'm saying here is, if the study authors do not control for the exercise that the athletes are already adapted to, then the results of the study legitimately don't say jack shit as far as what training methods are best for my intended outcome. Okay? So these are very real problems that trained scientists understand about exercise science. Now here is kind of where we gotta. So the thing is, that doesn't mean science is completely fucked. And so, nutritional factors, like nutritional studies. If you do nutrition studies on people who are, you do nutrition studies, like let's say you have a ketogenic diet group, and then you have a vegan diet group, okay? And you're measuring blood cholesterol levels, you're measuring diabetes risk factors, whatever, okay? And you study them at baseline, and you study them at the end of the study, okay? There's a lot of confounding variables that have to be controlled for. You need to control for the calorie intake. You need to control for, and also this study's been done, a 12-month study, and it's really good. And it was funded by the government, and they actually showed the Atkins diet group, the kind of ketogenic group, actually had triple the improvements in almost every marker studied except for LDL cholesterol. And they were able to eat unlimited calories, and the others were calorie restricted. But you got to control for calories. You got to control for LDL cholesterol, you got to control for genetic factors on cholesterol, genetic factors on diabetes. You got to control, race supposedly plays a role, age plays a role, and also the mindset plays a role. And what about sleep? In the mainstream, there's all this talk and claims that how much sleep you get every night has a direct impact on your blood sugar levels and your health outcomes. Okay? So, and they're not controlling for sleep. Most of these studies say nothing about sleep at all. Yet this supposedly plays a role. And then they got to control for their exercise. Because some of and the thing is, they'll categorize them in groups like people who do exercise and people who don't. and maybe the quantity of time. But the type of exercise they do matters. And we're not just talking weight training. Somebody who in these nutrition studies is like, oh, these people resistance exercise and these people don't. Well, in the resistance trained people's group, are they doing 5 sets of 5? Because that's not going to have a huge impact on their blood sugar compared to someone who's doing 10 sets of 10, which is an insane protocol that might not be optimal for muscle growth or whatever, but is enough activity and at a certain intensity that's going to burn off way more glycogen and glucose compared to the 3 sets of 5 group or whatever. And then how close to failure are these people training? These things are not accounted for in nutritional studies because it's a nutritional study, not an exercise study. And nutrition scientists are generally not trained in exercise science, so they don't understand how significant of an impact these very specific details of an exercise modality group in these studies will have in a 12-month study on like nutrition and impact on blood markers, okay? So, and I'm not going to talk too much deeper into this. A lot of people might have no clue what the fuck I'm trying to say here. And that's unfortunate, okay? But you need to understand when you're looking at internet comments and people in Reddit groups and forums, I'm just going to estimate at least 90% of these fucking people on here have no understanding of the very significantly important finer details of how science works. Like these things I just mentioned, these variables that are not accounted for. But yet these people are the ones who will use science as their reasoning as to why what they believe is valid. Now, okay, we've discussed why one of the big reasons why anecdotes are inherently flawed on their own. Okay, the ketogenic diet groups or the carnivore diet groups, they're like, yeah, I have all of these positive benefits from the carnivore diet because plant foods are poisonous and meat is magic, okay? And the vegan diet people will be like the raw vegans on the very extreme. They'll be like, I have all these positive benefits, a lot of times the same positive benefits as the carnivore people have. I have all these positive benefits on the raw vegan diet because meat is evil, it's toxic, it's poisonous, and plant foods are magical, they're spiritual, they're alkaline. Literally, they're saying the same fucking thing about completely different methods as to why their shit works and has positive benefits. Now, hear this. The carnivore diet people, when they have negative side effects, they will be like, well, I have these like skin rashes and stuff because of oxalate detox. I'm detoxing oxalates from the toxic spinach. All the anti-nutrients and oxalates and things. Look up Kelly Norton's speech. Okay? All these side effects I'm having, you know, is because of oxalates. It's detox. It's the carnivore detox, everybody. The meat cleanse. Okay? And then the freaking raw vegans, they'll be like, well, your body's detoxing from all that rotten meat. And your intestinal lining will start to shed itself. Or you'll just start to shit yourself. And then the raw vegans, I have seen them post pictures of, like, I don't want to make it too graphic, but they'll post pictures of their shit. And then they'll be like, that's mucoid plaque, everyone. Or they'll be like, that's a giant parasite detoxed from all the meat I was eating for, like, most of my life. You see, this is why I'm dying, because of the meat detox, okay? These people need fucking science, and they need therapy, okay, from like a clinical freaking psychologist, okay? They need to get seen and evaluated for schizophrenia. And people who are like, you know, and don't even get me started on the carnivore people, okay? And let me just say also that not all vegans are like that, and not all carnivore people are like that. But that is a huge problem with the damn anecdotal side, okay? So then you have the really like evidence-based people, okay? The evidence-based people that also ignore a shit ton of evidence. so that they can stay stuck in their like mainstream paradigm. Okay, they stay stuck with the general consensus. And they're like these large meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. Okay, we're talking. Look, this meta-analysis meaning a gigantic compilation, a combination of like anywhere from 10 to 100 different studies that all have their own flaws and confounding variables and stuff. We'll combine all these studies together, okay? All these different studies with different populations and things, and then we'll take someone who has a PhD in statistics or data analysis, which I've had clients that have that. They're professors in data analytics, and we'll use complex statistics and mathematics to try to combine all this data from a variety of different studies that have a variety of different study designs, and conducted by people with different biases and have different confounding variables, and they're different population groups. Okay, and we'll pretend that we have all bases covered. Okay, and combine all of this information to try to deduce or reduce down to some kind of comprehensive overview on the reality and the conclusion of what's actually going on and what all these studies are really saying. And then every couple years, we will update our conclusions on what is actually going on in the real world with real people on an individual day-to-day basis based on these large freaking compiled studies and things. And that's evidence-based fucking science, how the world works type of thinking, okay? That is the golden standard. That's the top of the scientific hierarchy. And again, I've had clients who literally are published authors who conduct these meta-analysis, and it's like we start talking about this, and it's like, yeah, I just do this. This is my my job, and I agree with you, and that's why I prefer to do more quality control studies on quality control for products rather than health science and stuff, because it's like, whoa. How much am I actually? Well, anyway. And then it's like, well, if it's not what about all these clinical trials, right? Randomized controlled clinical trials, right? So, and then it's like anything that doesn't align with my meta-analysis and, the dozens and dozens of studies that I think are credible, that directly contradict the dozens and dozens and thousands of studies that contradict my thing or whatever. Like, these are the ones that are credible, okay? Now, here's the thing, though. Obviously, on a case-by-case basis, you got to sit down and you got to actually analyze every intervention trial and whatnot to figure out what's actually going on, okay? And like some of these problems I mentioned earlier in the exercise science studies and how human adaptation takes place, as long as you like kind of filter your understanding of the evidence through those confounding variables, and you understand the methodology and these things, then that's fine. Because evidence is evidence. But evidence is not proof about how the world actually works. Evidence is not like, all the evidence is pointing towards 5 sets of 5 being the best training routine, which obviously is a stupid statement to make. Everyone knows that has science background. But, most of the evidence suggests 5 sets of 5 is like all you need. It's like the best thing. And it's like, that's not exactly how evidence works. It's just like, there's a lot of studies that show, 5 sets of 5 produces good results for this method under these certain circumstances with a list of the different people it work for, different situations it work for. And so it's like, is it that 5 sets of 5 is the best? Is it that the vegan diet is the best? Or is it that under these circumstances, this result is produced, and therefore if you follow the same protocol that they did, you are maybe going to get the same results, right? Like the plant-based people, like they have lots of evidence that shows a whole food plant-based diet produces good health outcomes, okay? So here's a good way to kind of wrap this up, okay? And understand that all of this stuff is extremely nuanced, and it's not black or white thinking. It's like, it's not this or that, okay? This is good or bad, or that is good or bad. It's actually, well, this can be good and bad at the same time, and to certain degrees under certain circumstances, and compare and it's not really that comparable to this other thing that might be kind of good and bad at the same time for different circumstances, but also might just be completely bad altogether. It's crazy. People don't think this way. They can't. They're scared. They're like, fuck, I don't know what to think. Ah! You know, people are like, no, science has to be everything. Or they'll have to be like, no, science has to be flawed and you can't rely on it. Like, people need to be told exactly what to think or they'll freak out. They're like, fuck, ah! I need a God. I need a scientific paradigm. I need an exact idea of what is actually going on. Or else I have to accept the possibility that I don't know. How am I supposed to live my life effectively if I don't know exactly how things exactly work? Right? You're a quack because you think science is not 100% solid. Or whatever it is, right? And then people be like, well, no, yeah, well, obviously science is not 100% solid, but it's pretty clear by the evidence that the majority of the evidence suggests this is most likely the case, and therefore, you know, the science is pretty clear. It's clear enough. It's like, well, is it though? Right? We need to take a more philosophical approach in order to have a working understanding of how things work. We need to kind of relax a little bit, be a little bit more neutral and less emotional about things, and talk about this in a kind of like detached and fun. I don't know, man. I don't know about everyone else. But anyway, so here is kind of how you all need to look at it. And this is just one specific example, but it's again nuanced and universal and complex. So we have, okay, the science on plant foods, okay? The science on plant foods. And then we have the anecdotes on plant foods, okay? Or the subjective kind of claims on plant foods, okay? So you have the carnivore people who are like, don't eat vegetables. They have defense mechanisms that kill humans. Plant foods are poisonous, and it should be common sense because of all these people who suffer when they eat plant foods, okay? And then you have the plant-based people who are like, no, plant foods are consistently shown to improve markers of disease, and you know you're always told to eat your fruits and vegetables. You know, like Popeye said, eat your spinach to get buff, which actually doesn't make you buff, but whatever. Therefore, you know, detoxes estrogens or whatever they'll say. Therefore, you should eat your fruits and vegetables, and if you don't eat your fruits and vegetables, you know, you're at a very high risk of cancer and diabetes and things. And like, you know, if you don't eat fiber, you're going to be constipated or whatever. Because the totality of evidence suggests that that's the case, okay? So there's claims on one side, then claims on the other. Like, vegetables are definitely good because the evidence shows that, you know, such a high reduction in risk of disease when you eat vegetables. Then you have the freaking carnivore people who are like, no, it'll kill you. They've got oxalates and phytates and even like saponins will, you know, freaking destroy the gut-brain barrier or whatever. Okay. Then you have, so here's the science, okay? Here's what how to interpret the science, okay? We have population studies, okay, large population studies that consistently show in a dose-dependent response, the higher the plant food intake, the lower the rates of disease, okay, or the lower the risk of disease. And of course, then you have absolute risk, like the actual realistic risk reduction you can expect for whatever disease we're talking about. And you have relative risk, which is the risk reduction in the high plant group versus the low plant group. Okay, relative risk is going to always be higher than absolute risk because relative risk is within the study design and within the groups in the study. Absolute risk is in the real world, how much is your risk reduction really going to be compared, in the actual world based on what we know about just the absolute risk of that disease in general. Okay. Relative risk is still important because it's just giving us more of a clue as to what might be the case, right? But it's not something you just be like, well, you have like a 35% relative risk reduction when you eat more broccoli, and therefore you're going to get cancer if you don't eat fucking broccoli or something like that, right? That's not true because the relative risk is usually like 2% or something. It's like, well, that's, the absolute risk is like 2%. So it's like, I don't know about that. So anyway, but that doesn't mean that may not be any benefit for the broccoli group, for the risk reduction group. Now you got to take intervention studies, and intervention studies might show decreased blood sugar and benefits if you eat broccoli or whatever, right? So that's why intervention studies are important, so that we can see what actually goes on when we put people on these diets. Okay? But then we have mechanistic studies, and that mechanistic studies can help us understand, well, what's going on with the risk reduction in the population studies on the broccoli group, and what's going on in the intervention studies with the broccoli group. And mechanistic studies might help us understand, well, why do they get what they do? And then we got to compare the low fiber diet science to the high fiber diet science and the mechanisms of fiber, so we can get a better understanding of what's actually going on with fiber, instead of just being like, well, fiber just helps you no matter what. It's like, well, are there other interventions we can use on low fiber groups that give them the same risk reduction? And so it's a constant compare and contrast with different types of evidence and the different groups in these different type of evidence that are studied for whatever the subject is compared to the other groups, and it's constant compare and contrast in that regard. And even then we don't have a 100% understanding. But anyway, here's how you interpret the plant studies, okay? That risk reduction, okay? You have the highest plant group or whatever. If there is a consistent risk reduction in disease, and you put people on interventions and they reverse disease on the plant-based group, and you have lots and lots of people who eat a plant-based diet that have dramatically improved health outcomes, okay? Then the carnivore people saying, well, plants are killing you and it's making, it's causing all the it's poisonous and this and that, and it's like you should avoid plant foods because they're deadly. Well, how the fuck can that be true when almost like the vast majority of evidence on plant foods actually show the more plant foods you eat, the better health outcomes you have? What that shows is that plant foods are probably not deadly, and they're definitely not as deadly and problematic as these carnivore people say. However, here is the kicker, okay? And this is where people who have an IQ under 80 will kind of lose track and freak out and bring fire torches to me. Is that just because plant foods studies on plant foods consistently show greater health outcomes when you eat more plants, that doesn't mean that it's the plant foods that are causing that health outcome, okay? What that shows is like, well, you can eat a lot of plants, and if anything, it'll probably be health promoting. However, if you're one of those people who have autoimmune illness and you go on a carnivore diet and you have resolution of all your symptoms, okay? What's a better situation? Someone who does not suffer debilitating Crohn's disease where their fucking asshole bleeds and they can someone who's on a carnivore diet and removing plant foods, and they just completely resolve their debilitating disease, like they feel so much better. Or someone who forces themselves to eat these plant foods because these vegan gurus and plant-based gurus say that you have like a 2% relative risk reduction in cancer and these other diseases. Like, are you going to force yourself to eat these plant foods because the data on paper claims these miraculous health benefits? Or are you going to follow like, well, shit, I'm dying when I eat those foods, I'll just remove them, right? And so on a scientific level, what you have to understand is that is the confounding variables, okay? What are some other protocols that people typically use that reverse type 2 diabetes? Generally, just being more, exercising more, okay? Being in a caloric deficit, fat loss. All these things can, resolve the symptoms of type 2 diabetes, and they can improve your blood markers of various cholesterol, weight loss, fat loss, just better body composition. And so you can improve your health markers, the blood markers that these plant foods supposedly improve just by losing weight, just by exercising more, just by being in a caloric deficit, just by removing junk foods. You can have all the same benefits that a lot of these plant foods are claimed to improve, okay? And there's a lot of benefits that maybe you can't, like the supposed relative risk reduction in cancer and things. Like, we don't know. That's a very complicated thing. But it does show, like, just living a generally healthier lifestyle, no matter how many plant foods you eat, will generally have similar benefits. And there are actually quite a bit of studies that show, like, for example, the red meat thing. Like, people who eat a lot of red meat, but also exercise more, live healthier lifestyles, and include more fruits and vegetables in their diet, the health outcomes are almost identical to the plant-based group. And the question is it that these vegetables provide a healthier kind of outcome? Well, that's up for debate, okay? A lot of people claim that these polyphenols have a hormetic effect, even though we can't really tell, and intervention trials are not that promising. But here is a good interpretation, is that people who eat more fruits and vegetables tend to live healthier lifestyles. And that is probably why we see better health outcomes in population studies. That's my interpretation. And the thing is, it's not really that far-fetched of an interpretation. Okay? Because we know just exercising more, just eating less calories, eating less junk food, living a healthier lifestyle is going to resolve a lot of metabolic problems, regardless of fruit and vegetable intake, and regardless of your meat intake. People who eat more red meat, for example, tend to eat it in the form of hamburgers, and they tend to not care about their health, and think about the typical American red meat meal. It's like a hamburger with french fries and a soda, okay? Because steak and these, healthier kind of meal styles that come with red meat are very expensive, and it's just not realistic to assume that it's the red meat. When you understand the average American that's being studied in these studies generally are not just eating red meat, and they're not eating red meat in a healthy fashion. It's generally hamburgers and fat motherfuckers who are eating all the sodas and the freaking french fries and all that stuff, okay? So what does all this mean? It means that science is important, but you must think extremely critically about it, and you must look through the lens of anecdotes and what's working for people, and compare and contrast all of the different types of study designs, the different interventions being studied, opposing viewpoints, and look at what's actually working in the real world to help you understand the results you're getting in science. Okay, but people don't want to accept that. People want to think, no, science tells us what works and what we need to do, and anecdotes are meaningless. It's like, no, we need to look at, what's working in real life, look at the science to help us understand what's working, and then look at the science to see why it's working, okay? So using the plant-based evidence, we can see the reason why carnivore people are getting better health outcomes is not because plants are poisonous, okay? There's probably other reasons, okay? And the reason why vegan people are getting better health outcomes is probably not because meat is toxic, okay? And another one, like the ketogenic people. Ketogenic people think that keto diets cause weight loss because insulin levels go down. And they reverse diabetes because you're not eating carbs. They think, oh, it's because you're not eating carbs. Carbs are poisonous. It's like, well, actually, you're probably in a huge caloric deficit because protein and fat are extremely satiating. And you're probably reversing type 2 diabetes, yes, because you're reducing carb intake, but also because you're losing weight. Also because you're eating less calories, right? But you don't understand that without a scientific understanding. And you don't understand that by looking at gurus like Dr. Berg. You understand that by looking at the scientific evidence and comparing it to the anecdotes, okay? And then, like the freaking exercise science, like, same thing applies. Like, what works in the real world, and then, use science to help you understand that, right? Okay, so that's all I'm going to say, and hopefully this makes sense, and hopefully people watch the whole video. Otherwise, people are just going to assume I'm saying one thing and not really understand what I mean. They're going to just think, oh, he's either for the plant-based people, or he's for the carnivore people, or he's for the evidence-based people. And it's like, well, there's pros and cons to a lot of these different things. There's reasons why carnivore works, and we have to just use the science, okay? Autoimmune illness that's being resolved by carnivore is probably because these people have, they have abnormal sensitivities to these foods, okay? Probably triggered by previous antibiotic use that ruins the health of their intestine, okay? All right. Leave a question, comments down below. I got to go pee. I'll talk till next time.